turn things over to Jason, and we'll see where the discussion goes. It's all you, Jason.
Thank you. Just be 1 minute to pull up the presentation. Okay, thank you. So the current and to be specified 2023 specs for bluefish involve an ABC of just over 100,000 pounds. Big picture wise, just kind of set the scene. There were no changes recommended by the SSC or the monitoring committee. This table is just review landings. Characterized by that big spike in 2014 that kind of kicked off management. The states, it was discussed a little bit earlier about the higher Blueline landings in Maryland in 2021. But again, just some background of the time series and then state landings in 2021. This is Blueline price per pound, inflation adjusted. 2021 saw continued increase in the trend that we've seen in the last few years. Ex-vessel value, again, this is kind of combining the landings and the price, down a little bit in 2021, partially because there's a bit of a overrun in 2020, and there wasn't in 2021. This just describes the quota monitoring for 2021 in blue. The service decreased the trip limit to 300 pounds in September and ended up pretty close to the quota. The yellow line from last year, you can see, was a bit above the quota. The service did not decrease the trip limit in 2020, and there are just some issues with monitoring that small quota. But they did close it in September in 2021, and we ended up right around the quota. So in terms of recreational catch, it's kind of an interesting situation here. We have 3 numbers for recreational catch numbers of fish here. MRIP was almost 49,000 fish. The new private VTR, 343 fish for private, and then kind of what was used in the last assessment and is what's been being used in recent years, the Delphi expansion, which basically takes the charter catch, multiplies it by 1.05, and to derive an estimate for private. And that was kind of done in the lead up to the previous Blueline Tilefish assessment. Party charter numbers on the left there, they've tallied between 10 and 15,000 fish fairly consistently for this time series. Fishery performance reports highlights kind of a strong message both on the commercial and rec side that the current quota and trip limits, either commercial or rec, really limit directed fishing. There are a few folks who kind of try to put a trip together, mixing some blue lines and goldens, maybe some other species too, but it's just not worth it to direct just for blue lines. And then just for commercial, it starts at 500, goes to 300. When we start to approach the quota, and then goes to 0 at the quota. For the recreational bag limit is 3 fish for private anglers, 5 for hire uninspected charters, and then 7 for hire inspected the head boats generally. Other highlights from the AP report, again, kind of noting the recreational catch volatility, not a lot of faith in them. Again, that targeting concern that came up with goldens and whether some analysis might be useful there. And then the recommendation on trying to think of ways, including some kind of link on the HMS site when people are renewing permits to get permitted for tilefish. And I'm not sure if Dr. Rago is on. If he is, he can kind of touch on the SSC highlights for blue lines.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. Yeah, there really isn't too much to say here. I think Jason has captured it very well. We did note that because Blueline tilefish are very rare within the angler intercepts, these are going to have low precision. We did comment on the fact that there will be an operational assessment in collaboration with the Southeast Center for 2024. And then, as Jason has already said, we concurred with the recommendation of the council staff that this should remain at the existing ABC of 100,520 pounds. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So again, summarizing, we have the ABC, no changes recommended by the SSC, likewise, none by the monitoring committee. We did have a substantial discussion of that recreational number, settled on, not seeing a need or cause to change from the Delphi for now, but if as the private reporting improves, or we start getting consistent MRIP estimates, that could cause a change in considering what is the most appropriate estimate of the three to use for the recreational catch. So again, there's no action needed today. Dr. Rego touched on there's an operational assessment in 2024 through CDAR, kind of some preliminary back and forth. There's, I think we're hoping they update our data limited approaches, but they also have issues with their indices. So I think probably makes sense to keep expectations relatively low for what comes out of that operational assessment. We have had ongoing just kind of staff to staff communications on survey work. They recently expanded their numbers of stations a good bit for the South Atlantic deep water survey work. And we kind of poked them to see, is it possible you could further extend that up north more, beyond where it stops now, to try to capture more blue lines off the mid-Atlantic. So we just kind of try to keep that discussion in play. That's it for me. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jason. Appreciate the presentation. Thank you, Dr. Rego, for your discussion as well. Are there any questions for Jason? Anything anyone wants to bring up? I'll get to you in a second, Fred. Michelle Duvall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Jason. Just a quick question. For stat area 626, I think it spans like the Virginia and North Carolina border. How are commercial catches partitioned across that, since it sort of splits? It looks like it crosses the jurisdictional, management line between the Mid-Atlantic and the South Atlantic for this species. Are just all catches from that stat area, counted against the Mid-Atlantic ACL? Do you know, or if there's a formula or something?
I remember in development of the action, there were some formulas that we were using to try to partition historic catch. I'm not quite sure how the quota monitoring, the service may know how they're doing quota monitoring with blue lines, but it might be a follow-up.
Michelle.
Yeah, so just one more question, I guess, in terms of the recommendation from the advisors about trying to get something on the HMS permitting site. What's the likelihood of that? I don't know that you can answer that. I mean, maybe Mr. Penny might be able to provide some insight on, is that possible, just to try to improve awareness of that reporting requirement?
Mike, did you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for HMS. I know our staff are talking. I'm seeing if Doug Potts can help me out here. He was trying to provide an answer to the first question, which was about how we split that stat area. Doug seems to think it might be based on port of landing, which doesn't, really get it, but that might be the best we have. I'll have to follow up with you on the HMS webpage issue.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Anyone else at the table? Any other council members with any questions or comments? Kay Wilkie. We're not hearing you, Kate. At least we're not hearing you in the room.
How about
There.
now?
Now we hear
Oh,
you.
great. Sorry, I was talking away. Okay, this is kind of a follow-up to Michelle's question. The last time we talked about Blueline private reporting, we talked about this as an issue that the Outreach and Communications Committee might possibly take up and discuss ways to better get the word out about the reporting requirements. So I'm just curious if that committee has actually taken up the issue.
I'll have to turn to staff to provide that a response. Mary?
They haven't taken it up yet, but it is on the list of topics to be covered at the first meeting, which hasn't been scheduled yet, but will be within the next month or so.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Mary.
Okay, anyone else? Scott Lennox?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I totally agree with what they're saying about the reporting. And also, if something could be added to that outreach for regulations, it would be great too. I think some targeted information to folks that are getting permits or something like that would be a great idea. In my area, I get questions more about golden and Blueline tilefish regulations and seasons than I do about anything else. And it comes from both private and for-hire boats.
All right, Scott, thank you for those comments. I'm going to go out to the audience. Fred?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Fred Akers. I'm on the Tilefish AP, and I just want to make a recommendation. Well, first, I want to thank the council for the great staff work that Jose and Jason do on the Tilefish. But I see a pretty simple solution for outreach on the private permits, and that's almost every boat that's in Tilefish waters is going to have an HMS permit. I do. So I get reminders for the HMS permits, like really good reminders. And then I go on the HMS permit shop to renew my permit, and the webpage comes up and it asks me, do I want to fish for sharks? And then I have to, if I do, I have to do an endorsement, and I have to take a test and pass a test. And then I can file my HMS permit with the shark endorsement. And that is the place where there should be a bullet on the HMS renewal permit webpage that says, and if you're going to fish for tilefish, you need a tilefish permit, click here. And that would get the eye of everyone that's renewing an HMS permit. And also there should be reminders for the private tilefish permit like there are for the HMS permit. So I think that would go a long way to put that in front of all the HMS permit appliers that they need a tilefish permit if they're going to fish for tilefish. So thanks a lot.
All right, thanks for those suggestions, Fred. Okay, I don't see any other hands at this time, and no comments suggesting any changes to the 2023 Blueline tilefish specs. I think that concludes our business here this morning. Jason?
Yeah, and just to clarify, and Jose suggested meeting, and that they kind of add that notice to the HMS permit shop. I just ping them again that it's still an item of interest.
Okay, thanks, Jason. All right, we are moving right along here this morning. Excuse me. Did somebody's hand? Who was it? Dan?
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted, in my mind, it's more about reporting than people getting permits. I thought I saw on the Golden presentation, didn't the permits shoot up to over 800 permits issued last year? That which was almost triple from the year before. So aside from, obviously with Fred Akers, that's a good idea, but people should be reminded also on that website that they have to report every year. Just another thought. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Dan. Excuse me. Okay, so we are going to, instead of taking a break, I think we can just take up the next item on our agenda. When that's concluded, we'll just take a longer lunch because I want to start the afternoon off at 1 o'clock. So we have Carrie with the Protected Resources Division of NIMS with us. Carrie, are you there?
I am here, yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, you sound great. Whenever you're ready
How are you?
for the presentation, you can go ahead and get started.
Okay, I think Kirsten has the presentation and she's going to share that.
Whoa. You actually fell asleep?
Possible that Laurie Nolan is not muted.
Yeah, Stephen has the presentation up, so you're all set.
Oh, okay. So I can't see it, but I guess if everybody else can, we should be all set.
I can't see it on my screen either. We'll get there, Carrie. 1 second.
Okay. No worries.
I mean, I wonder what works beyond knows about that.
Hey, Laurie Nolan, if you're listening, can you go on mute? We can hear you in the background.
Okay, I can see the presentation now. Can everybody else? I'm assuming yes. Okay, if we're all set, I'll go ahead and get started. So anyway, I guess that's all set. So yeah, thank you, Bridget. Thank you for having me here back again today to talk about turtle bycatch and trawl fisheries. As you may recall, I did present on sea turtle bycatch in mid-Atlantic and Northeast trawl fisheries at the December council meeting. And at that time, I shared background information, the research conducted on turtle excluder devices and data loggers, the measures under consideration by NIMS, and our avenues to get public input. So the purpose of this presentation today is to really just follow up to that meeting to share what we've heard from our stakeholder engagement efforts to date, and then to request additional council feedback. So next slide, please. So as a refresher, the Endangered Species Act and the Magnuson-Stevens Act both require that bycatch be minimized, and if unavoidable, that the mortality be minimized. So the latest bycatch analysis by the Northeast Fisheries Science Center estimated about 670 sea turtles captured in trawl fisheries in the mid-Atlantic and on Georges Bank from 2014 through 2018. In our region, the highest level of observed trawl bycatch occurs in the Atlantic croaker, longfin squid, and summer flounder fisheries, as measured by the top landed species by weight on the trip. So as such, we have been conducting research on various turtle excluder device designs in these fisheries, as well as on data loggers that measure tow time. Final research is ongoing or planned, but we do have several management measures under consideration that we would like input on. If a proposed rule is developed, there will be a public comment period. However, we really do want early feedback at this point so we can take that into consideration of any measures or integrate those ideas into future gear research. So next slide, please. So again, these are the measures under consideration. I did present on these same ones at the last meeting, and they're also in, excuse me, the briefing materials. So the first one looks at requiring TEDs with a larger escape opening in trawls that target croaker, weakfish, and longfin squid. The second and third items noted here look at revising the current TED requirements in the summer flounder fishery. More specifically, as noted in number 2, it looks at moving the northern boundary of those TED requirements to a point farther north. And then the third one looks at amending those TED requirements to require a larger escape opening in the TEDs. The fourth one was added. This looks at adding an option that would require limited tow durations if found to be feasible and enforceable in lieu of TEDs, and this would provide a greater flexibility to the fisheries and give folks an option. So next slide, please. So we presented this information multiple times to reach industry and a variety of different stakeholders. I did want to thank those of you who helped get the word out and encourage people to attend our webinars. It was greatly appreciated. Specifically, I gave presentations in December at the New England and Mid-Atlantic Councils and at AFMC in January. In February, I presented and took comments at a joint council summer flounder, scup, black sea bass, and squid, mackerel, butterfish advisory panel meeting. And we also had a series of webinars in February and March that presented the same information as presented to the councils and commission, but dug a little bit deeper into some of the specifics on the fisheries and data. We did have 2 additional call-in days that were set up so that the public could share their comments orally. And the green text noted at the bottom here shares the comment venue that's still ongoing. That is, we are accepting public comments at the email address noted until the end of May. That said, I imagine some of these topics will need to be discussed over the year or so our timing is a little bit flexible on that. So next slide, please. So how was our attendance? Well, despite our efforts to engage the public, participation was somewhat limited. The numbers of attendees who were not NOAA staff are listed in the parentheses for the individual webinars. Overall, 24 unique individuals participated in the webinars, with 1/3 of them attending multiple meetings. At the webinars, attendance mostly involved state contacts, industry representatives, and interested public. And most of the feedback consisted of questions instead of comments. We didn't receive any comments during our call-in days, and we have only received 2 written responses thus far. We received most of the questions and comments from the council meetings, as well as the AP meeting where 18 advisors attended. So overall, to date, there have been 31 questions and 31 comments. So next slide, please. So what did we hear? Well, as you recall, we did ask for information on specific questions, which were noted in my last presentation, your previous briefing materials, and they're also on our website. So on this slide, feedback on those topics is noted first, and the overall comments are organized by general topic, and they're summarized at a high level. So all of this information represents comments received at the council and commission meetings, the public webinars, and written comments combined. And the majority of these bullets represent one commenter, but in several cases, multiple individuals express the same comment. And so I'll note that when we get to the point. So as far as geographical scope of the future regulations, a responder asked us to consider exempting small vessels, which in the comment was defined as 40 feet in length overall, from the regulations, as well as to consider take differences between inshore, nearshore, and offshore waters. We did hear some feedback on how to define fisheries, but additional input here would be very beneficial. From what we have heard, it does appear appropriate to combine weakfish with croaker when looking at gear modifications, and that both of these fisheries have limited effort at this time. We also heard that it may be worth looking at combining summer flounder and longfin squid when considering gear modifications, as many of those vessels fish for the same species, for both species rather. And there was also the suggestion to look at gear type, such as fly nets, when pursuing gear regulations rather than specific target species. We also asked for input on implementation of limited tow durations and operational issues. There were several questions and comments on how tow duration could be defined. And one suggestion was to define tow time when the winch is engaged, so as to better account for bottom time. With a limited tow duration, there were also some concerns with the lower catch per unit effort, which would result in a higher area swept. Now, this in turn could increase the bycatch of multiple species and increase industry costs overall. And lastly, there was a question on how tow limits would be enforced. Next slide, please. We only received a few comments on the specific economic impacts of future regulations. We did hear, though, that gear modifications would be a direct economic loss for the squid fishery, as that fishery cannot switch to targeting another species on the same trip. It was also requested that a full economic evaluation occur of any potential measures. I will note as an aside that if we do proceed with developing regulations, it will be through the normal rulemaking process, which includes socioeconomic and environmental analyses, as well as soliciting public comment. So as far as implementation, there was a comment that requested a maximum limit on possession of a species be defined before requiring TEDs, perhaps mirroring the mesh size restrictions for summer flounder and the incidental trip limits for squid. This would help identify which vessels would require a TED. There was also a comment on using water temperature to help define the area and timing of the regulations. We heard that cable TEDs would likely be preferred by the industry based upon the gear structure and research to date, and that providing options of gear measures for the industry to choose what works for them would be preferred. And then finally, it was stressed that we need to continue to engage and involve the industry in these efforts, especially to obtain input on gear characteristics that may be relevant to rulemaking. And you can go ahead and move along now. Thank you. So there were several data needs also identified through our outreach activities. I should note that these are all of the issues identified, and several of these are already being worked on or were already incorporated into subsequent webinars. Also, these webinars are available on our Trawl website if you'd like to review them. As far as turtle bycatch data are concerned, several commenters requested that we look at takes over time and by geographical area, as well as consider bycatch both observed and estimated in conjunction with observer coverage and overall fishing effort. It was suggested also by several commenters that we look at bycatch by trawl net characteristics instead of by just top landed species. We heard that it is important to look at the bycatch levels in areas where TEDs are currently required to see how the TEDs are working, and multiple individuals commented that all threats to sea turtles should be addressed instead of just commercial trawl fishing, specifically focusing on impacts of vessel strikes, marine debris, and recreational fishing. And finally, sea turtle population and trend numbers were desired. As far as specific fishing gear data needs, we heard that commercial fishing effort over the last 10 years should be evaluated, especially in consideration of bycatch levels. It was suggested that we analyze available tow duration data before requesting industry modify their tow durations, perhaps stratifying by vessel size. And also it was noted that the durability and potential clogging of TEDs continue to be evaluated in gear research activities. Next slide, please. So in the various webinars and meetings, there were a lot of questions, and I've noted most of them here. Specifically, there were several questions on the Northeast Fisheries Science Center's bycatch estimate process, methodology, and results. We were also asked about the numbers of dead versus alive takes and NIMS post-interaction mortality process. There were also questions about the level of observer coverage in the various fisheries, research details, turtle behavior in relation to trawl gear, among other things. So same as with the data needs, some of these questions were answered at the time of the presentation, some were responded to after the presentation, and some are still being explored. So next slide, please. So as mentioned, we had a series of topics on which we needed input. Again, these questions were all on our in our previous outreach presentations and briefings and are on our website. Specifically, they focused on mitigation measures and operational and economic considerations. We still need input on these topics, and in particular, how to define the fisheries or gear to which gear measures would apply. We also need any and all information to include in our future bycatch reduction efforts. So there still is a need and time to provide input. Our website, which I noted here at the bottom of the screen, has all of the background information and relevant information related to this action, as well as recordings and slides from the public webinars. So I do encourage you to look at that website for additional information. We can move along to the next slide, please. So what happens next? I am presenting this information also to the New England Council and ASMFC, and we'll be requesting comments then, as well as written comments through the end of May. At that time, we will then summarize and review all comments, and it's my intent to put together a written summary of everything received and post it on our website, the Trawl website I just mentioned. Then we have research scheduled over the next year or so. After that, we will review the research as well as the comments received through this current initiative and then determine a path forward. So the decision on rulemaking will likely occur at least a year out, and we will also keep you updated on the progress and our plans. We can move to the next slide. So I greatly thank you for your time, interest, and feedback on the issue. So I can pass it back to you, Mr. Chairman, to see if anybody has any public comments to share.
Look to members of the council at this time if anyone has anything they'd like to share or have questions or want to provide any comment. Wes Townsend.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Carrie, is it possible, instead of a 20-year time series of the interactions, can you get it broken down into 5 years? Because I know effort has changed. And is it possible to get that?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I can do that for you, and I can share that with Carson that can share them with the council. Would that be a good course of action?
Yes, thank you very much.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Next I have Chris Batsavage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Carrie, for the summary. Can you go back to the previous slide, please, to kind of show the next steps? Okay, let's just make sure I understand this correctly. Yeah, I guess rulemaking is a year out, but is it dependent? It's dependent on the ongoing research and additional comments. Is there a possibility that based on the additional research and comments that rulemaking might not occur, or is it anticipated that some sort of rulemaking to mitigate sea turtle interactions in these fisheries is going to happen? Just not sure at what extent it'll happen. Am I correct in that?
At this point today, we do intend to engage in rulemaking, and at this time, we are exploring all of the options available to us. But that said, nothing is set in stone, so it does depend on the comments and the research to date. So I'm giving you a very wiggly answer, but you know, it is our intent to proceed with management measures, and we will be taking all of the information into consideration as we look at our next steps. That
No,
helps.
thanks. That
clarify it.
It does. No, thank you for that. Yeah, I think just I think I raised a concern during the Atlantic Croaker hearing that you know, the minimal input and comments could be an issue for not only the industry but also for NOAA Fisheries when it gets to the rulemaking stage. The more information that's provided, maybe the better options are available for rulemaking. So thanks for that.
All right, thanks, Chris. Thanks, Carrie, for that. I'm going to go next to Pat Gear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Carrie. I just had a quick question. Is there a minimum size net that would be exempt from the TED? That's my first question.
We have not identified a minimum size net, no, at this point. That is information that we would like to hear from the public on, and we'll take that into consideration. But no, we haven't identified anything at this point, no.
Okay, my second question is, what tow durations, I mean, is there a recommended tow duration, maximum tow duration that would be exempt from a TED?
So at our preliminary stage right now, we are looking at a 1 hour tow time within that range of, that would be the tow duration requirement. However, we are looking for feedback on how to best define those tow times, be it bottom time. We are looking, the data that we have is based upon the observer program information. So that was established by hitting the water and then to when the winch is engaged, when the gear is pulled back out. We do not have a specific definition yet for the tow time limits, but I guess to answer your question, we are considering options around the 1 hour time frame.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Dan Farnham?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Carrie. Just one, actually two questions. Number one, do you have any idea how far north the boundary, what are you looking at as far as a northern boundary for TED use as of right now?
So there is a map on one of the slides. I don't know, I think it might be the next slide. Let's see, maybe one more. Yeah, it's very small. I don't know if you can see that, but again, we're talking about the geographical and seasonal measures here, but we do not have anything currently defined. However, if you look at the turtle bycatch data, we would be looking at where the fisheries and turtle observed catch overlap. So it would be our intent to be south of probably Massachusetts, for example.
Yep, okay, thank you for that. And I see the map here, but it's kind of hard to define depths on it. Is this problem perceived to be more of an inshore? I mean, to me, it looks like an inshore. So if the line gets moved to the north, will the requirements be the same for if the vessel's inshore or offshore? Different? Would it be split by how deep the vessel is, or what's the intent? Thank you.
Yes, that's a good question. Most of the turtle interactions in trawl fisheries occur in water shallower than 50 meters. And it depends a little bit on we did look at it by top landed species by weight. Like for example, summer flounder, 40 out of the 45 takes occurred less than 50 meters. However, for longfin squid, it seems to be split. The level of take lower and higher than 50 meters. We would be looking at depth into consideration with geographical measures and looking at all the data available to us when making our requirements. But if there are public comments on that, we would definitely appreciate some feedback on that particular issue.
Yep, very good. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Thanks, Carrie. Michelle Duval?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Carrie. And I can't recall, this might have been brought up at the December council meeting, but Carrie, can you remind me, do we have any information on potential shifts in effort when the original northern boundary TED, the northern boundary line for TED requirements was put in place? I'm just curious, if we have any information on that, because it might help inform any discussion on the utility of, moving that line north versus some of the other things y'all are considering. Thanks.
Yes, and I'm assuming you're specifically talking about the summer flounder TED requirements. And yes, we did look at that during our summer flounder webinar, and I can share this information with you as well. But at the time of those regulations, a lot of the summer flounder fishing was occurring off of North Carolina and Virginia. And now we know that it's occurring further north, more off of New York and New Jersey. And if I'm understanding your question correctly, I think that's what you're getting at. And yeah, that is something that we are looking into, and the distribution of the fishing effort.
Yeah, and so, I mean, obviously, excuse me, that some of that effort has shifted because of, the range of this species right now. So it's really more, can we tease out what the effects of that, of the implementation of that line were? And then the other question I had was, in the briefing materials, it noted that, with respect to the numbers that were presented at the December council meeting, that decomposed sea turtles were removed from the number. So it looks like it sort of cut, at least by a couple hundred turtles interactions. So can you shed a little bit more light on that? So these are, sea turtles that were already dead, they were decomposing, that just happened to, run into someone's net or something, or get caught up in a trawl. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Yes, and I apologize for that confusion. At the December council meeting, I presented that we had, in that time frame, the same time frame, 2000 through 2019, we had 274 total interactions. 95 were in croaker, 54 longfin squid, and 51 were in summer flounder. We looked back and removed the decomposed turtles, which was an oversight at that time. And so the results that I presented at the public webinars it was a total of 264 turtles, 95 were in croaker, 50 longfin squid, and summer flounder, and 45. So yes, you're right that when we review the observer data, we look at animals that are decomposed. For example, if they are moderately to severely decomposed, it's basically impossible that turtle interaction would have occurred in, like, just say a 1 hour tow time, 2 hour tow time. So those animals removed from any of our total numbers. So how they get into the net, if they're on the bottom and then they get caught in the trawl, that's probably what happens, but we do remove those in the total number. So what I presented today, those are the final ones that are in your briefing materials in April.
Thank you for that.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else from the council at this time? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to go to the audience. We have Megan Lapp on the virtual webinar. Megan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Megan Lapp, Fisheries. Carrie, I have a question. So I've seen data showing an estimated 476 sea turtle strandings due to vessel strikes annually from Maine to Virginia from the months of May to November. So 476 a year, and that's a lot more turtle takes than all the estimates you just discussed in your presentation regarding trawl bycatch. So my question is, since vessel strikes dwarf trawl interactions, does GARFO plan on initiating, say, speed restrictions from Maine to Virginia during the months of May through November to account for this source of mortality, since it's a much higher source of mortality than we're talking about with trawl interactions? Something similar to the right whale speed restriction zones. Thanks.
Thank you for your comment. I did look into that before our webinars, and I'll just share the numbers that I came up with. As I mentioned, from 2014 through 2018, there was an estimated 571 loggerheads to interact with trawl fisheries in the mid-Atlantic. And during that same time frame, we had 386 loggerheads stranded with evidence of watercraft injuries. And I will also note there were 74 with recreational fishing interactions and 11 with marine debris ingestion. So we recognize that those are underestimates because those are what are reported through the stranding network. To get to your question, we are looking into avenues to reduce the impacts of vessel strikes because we do recognize that it is a threat to sea turtles, and we are concerned with that. We are looking at integrating outreach materials into to registrations and voter outreach or education materials, and that's something that we're working on to date. So to specifically answer your question about vessel speed restrictions, that is not something that is currently on the table. We are looking at what the Southeast, in particular, some of the efforts that they're doing off of nesting beaches. We're looking to see what they're doing down there, but that is not currently on the table as to reducing vessel interactions. But that is something that we can certainly explore with you and looking at the vessel data further.
All right, thanks, Carrie, for that. Next, I'm going to go to Greg DiDomenico.
Good morning, Mike. Can you hear me?
Yep, you sound good.
Just a quick comment and quick question for Carrie. Carrie, I wanted to thank you and the Observer folks for our continued dialogue. I know it's been a little bit of a difficult back and forth trying to meet my requests, but I just wanted to thank you for that and keeping the lines of communication open, but also just ask you and urge you, the sooner I can have the data, the better I can make an informed decision. As you know, these turtle interactions are random and very infrequent. So I'm really trying my best to dial in to find some correlation between the interaction and the two fisheries that we're talking about. So again, thank you. But given the short time frame, the sooner I have the data, the better I can make a better informed decision and perhaps cut down on the interactions. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely, Greg. We appreciate your interest in the issue. And I know our Observer program is working to get the data requests fulfilled. And again, comments are due at the end of May. I probably shouldn't say this, but if you do need an extension, let me know, either the council or any individual, but let me know and we will get you the information as soon as possible. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I have one more hand from the audience, James Fletcher.
Okay, I can hear. Has any consideration ever been given to allowing turtle hatcheries to offset the loss? In other words, the natural mortality from the beach going to sea. If we had turtle hatcheries and having dealt with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, who says once it's on land, it's theirs, and National Marine Fisheries says once it goes on the water, it's theirs, and the zone between the high tide and low tide, nobody wants to touch. The question is, has a turtle hatchery ever been considered as a way to mitigate damages? Thank you.
So that's a question that we have heard before, and I think that you already stated it, but yes, you're right that U.S. Fish and Wildlife does have jurisdiction for turtles on land. So anything involving hatcheries is their responsibility, and you do need a permit for that work. However, NIMS is not a proponent of hatcheries. We did have a Kemp's Ridley head starting program in Texas years ago, but given the expenses and the logistical issues and nesting returns, that practice was discontinued. And we also know that the first couple days of a hatchling's life is important to get off the nesting beach as soon as possible before they run out of their egg yolk energy reserves. We also know that the survival rate of hatchlings and young juveniles is lower than that of larger juveniles and adults, and that segment of the population has a higher reproductive value. And so we were looking at recovering that species. So given those limited resources, we're not encouraging the use of hatcheries to achieve recovery, but we will take that comment into consideration when we're looking at these issues.
Thanks, Carrie. Okay, seeing no other hands from the audience, I'm going to come back to the council for any last thoughts or comments. Dan Farnham.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chair. Carrie, I just have a quick question. I'm looking at the updated numbers after the decomposed sea turtles were removed, from the equation. I see between 2000 and 2019, what does that turn into per year in like the average interacted per year? And after you take the observed trips, when you consider the unobserved trips, what's the final number per year for interactions that you think's happening?
I'm sorry, just to make sure I understand, are you talking about the observed interactions or are you talking about the estimated interactions?
No, I see the observed interactions, but when you take that out across the fleet, how many interactions do you think are happening per year on an annual basis?
So the information that we have, the bycatch estimate has 583 loggerheads for that 5-year time frame. So it would be 583 divided by 5. So let's just say like about a little bit more than 100 or so. If that's what we're estimating from all trawl interactions. So that's not allocated by fishery, specific like the croaker fishery, for example, but that's all trawl interactions. If that's, maybe I'm not understanding your exact question. But
That's it. Yep. Thank you very much. Yep.
All right, thanks, Dan. Thanks, Carrie, for that. All right, I don't see any other hands at this time. Excuse me. Carrie, thank you for your presentation, and we will continue to work with you guys to provide the comment for the purposes that you discussed here today.
Great, appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks for being here with us. All right, we really got through our morning agenda rather quickly here today, but given the interest in the discussion for this afternoon, I think it'd be best if we just took a long break until 1 o'clock, and we'll pick up with the afternoon agenda at 1 o'clock. Thank you.